Welcome to Sermon Brainwave with me, Karoline Lewis.
And me, Matt Skinner.
And me, Rolf Jacobson.
The texts for the 13th Sunday after Pentecost, which falls on September 7, 2025, are from Deuteronomy chapter 30, 15 through 20. Our alternate first reading is Jeremiah 18, 1 through 11. Psalm 1 is the psalm for today. Second reading is Philemon, 1 through 21. And then the gospel reading is Luke 14, 25 through 33. For many of our listeners out there, it might be Rally Sunday or Back Together Sunday or Coming Together Sunday or something like that.
New program year.
It's
like an unofficial church holiday.
Mm-hmm. So happy whatever
NFL
it is.
season starts. We got new TV going, new cars coming out. It's New Year's Day in
Pretty
our culture.
much. Yeah.
Something like that. And it's Philemon Day. Once every 3 years.
We could also call it that.
Let's just say you should read the whole book and add the last 4 verses that they left out.
Yeah,
All right.
probably a good idea.
We'll get back to that later, though. A really exciting Lucan text to read when people are coming back to church and getting ready for the year.
And reflecting on how much they have not perhaps acted out discipleship over the summer.
Perhaps, but
Maybe they have. Who knows?
it's a hard text.
This is a hard one to come back to, I think. I might add, speaking of adding verses, I might add 34 and 35 because it kind of, not just because it takes you to the end of the chapter and there's something very satisfying about that, but it also, I think, calls attention to this, what we've been hearing in this chapter of, salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how can its saltiness be restored? And without salt, it's, salt. I mean, without salt being salt, it's not salt. Did that just make sense?
Yeah, but this is a case, if you want to add that verse, where the literal, if you think the Bible is science, you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because salt can't lose its saltness. Salt's a rock. If you dissolve it and then boil the water off, it's still a rock. Salt can't lose its saltness. It's not
But maybe that's the point.
Well, I don't think it is, but I actually think it's sort of interesting to ask, what might this mean if it's not scientifically the point? What's the metaphorical point that Jesus is making about disciples being the salt of the earth and when salt loses its saltness, or that sort of connection?
They have to be who they
Or you
are.
can preach on Psalm 1, which is a great Rally Day text. We'll get there.
I'm out of my element. I just learned that salt was a rock.
It
You
is
didn't
a
know
rock.
that salt was a rock?
No.
Oh.
It dissolves.
Anyway.
All right.
Rock.
Okay.
I think it is a way into this story that is talking about really sort of the essence of discipleship, that it cannot not be sort of wholehearted, or it cannot not be fully what it is. And that there's really no kind of in between. You either are or you aren't. I think that's where I find that part helpful, which, not to diminish the difficulty of the cost of discipleship, as my Bible calls it, but it's to help people think about, this is who you are. And you either are who you are or you aren't who you are. And that requires cost and sacrifice. But at the same time, also, that's good news.
Right. Isn't part of what's going on there Jesus also saying you can't not be who you are?
Yeah.
To go back to what Rolf's saying, that salt's going to remain salt no matter what, that there's something a little absurd about what he's suggesting.
So I think it's an interesting lens through which to read the invitation or the statement of family and other tasks that you're called to give up.
Well, even verse 33, which is one of the most severe statements in the whole Gospel of Luke,
Mm-hmm.
right? None of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all of your possessions. We hear that as a commandment, as an entry requirement, but maybe there's something else there, right? The nature of discipleship is to be set free from these possessions. I'm not trying to water it down and say I don't have to make any changes, but you know what I mean? That there is, maybe we hear that in a way that the rest of the paragraph informs differently, right?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, want to hear not funny story? Good, I'll tell you.
Yes, we do.
My friend, a friend of mine named Brian, as a pastor, when he was in seminary and his mother was dying, said to him, I don't know what I did that I would deserve that God would do this to me. The only thing I could think of is I love my children more than God. What's funny about that story is like, blame your kids. It's your fault. I've got this horrible disease, which is a great passive-aggressive Swedish way of interacting with the world. But I bring it up. That's why it's a funny story. I bring it up because of verse 26. Whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters. And then the rest of verse 27 is sort of maybe it's a spin on who doesn't hate life itself, right? Whoever does not pick up their cross and follow me, kind of. And at the end, money. That you do have three things here that we love a lot. That is life itself, our possessions and money, and our immediate family. Most of us anyway. What does it mean to follow radically? And I don't have an answer to this, but I'm just asking questions here. What does it mean to follow Jesus if we also love these things? Are they false gods that Jesus demands us to disregard, or is it more complicated? Is Jesus' sarcasm here, hyperbole, pointing to a different way of discipleship? I don't know the answer.
I think that's good that you don't know the answer. I'm not sure anybody does. But I think a congregation is mature enough to wrestle with the question and would appreciate a pastor saying, here's what we know.
Yeah.
This is clearly hyperbole, I think, in some ways, the idea of hate. And the commentary talks about this. There's other places where Jesus talks about loving your neighbor and being a good person. So we're not talking about acrimony. We're not talking about wishing ill on people. And it's offensive in his ancient context where family is the key aspect of one's identity, one's security,
Community.
Has economics and communal connections. So he's clearly trying to get attention by what he's saying here.
Mm-hmm.
But what's he doing? What's he relativizing? What's he trying to suggest about this? And what happens when we view discipleship as not just me as an individual face-to-face with Jesus, but also as part of a community of fellow disciples? And just to kind of play with that a bit. Again, not to strip this of all of its sting, because that's the point of hyperbole. It's not just to make people laugh, but to sometimes make it sting.
I do also think it's worth reminding people that this line about hating children, then next week we're going to get the story. Well, actually, we don't. We only get the first two parables in Luke 15, don't we?
Right.
But at the end of that chapter, you do get a story where Jesus seems to think that family reconciliation is a good idea.
Right. Right. So again, you can't hang your whole theology on one verse, one passage.
Darn it.
That would be convenient.
Or one gospel all by itself to the exclusion of the other three. I was going to talk about counting the cost in here. And so this is the language about, building a tower and estimating the cost, or a king going out to wage war, not calculating armies and strategy and things like that. Those are distracting examples to me or analogies to me because they have to do with money and calculations, which always kind of worry me when that's becomes faith language. But I think the point here is less about, knowing to make sure. I measured the other day to see if a couch could fit down a stairway. You know what I mean? It's a lot of calculating for somebody who doesn't like doing math. But you get an answer at the end of the day, right? And you can't change what the math tells you. This, it strikes me, is more about just long-term commitment, right? Are you really in this not to try it out today, not for next week, but the language of counting the cost has a sense of this is going to change who you are. This is going to change how you love and who you love. This is going to change how you spend your money. This is going to change your view towards your possessions. It's going to change how you circulate in your society.
Your
that it's that kind of a holistic,
Mm-hmm.
And again, not in a threatening way, but just to say, don't think that this is just another membership that you add on to your Blockbuster video membership or whatever.
Dude, the last Blockbuster.
Whatever clubs we're in. I'm in the Nordy club.
Maybe you mean Netflix.
I'm a Nordy influencer. Netflix, exactly. But there is a sense of longevity and persistence to this as well, which means it's about learning and it's about a journey, which means you're not expected at the very beginning to know the destination or to know exactly what perfection looks like in that walk.
I think the word estimate is important here in that it's really causing a estimation or recalculation of all, as you said, of all of anything that would that would prevent you from following Jesus, or that would be an impediment or kind of sideline you. And if we think about it, that really should be true. I mean, and maybe then it's a very appropriate text for coming together Sunday or rally Sunday, where how is it that this is a time for kind of a recommitment or a reestimation of not just what your priorities are, but what really is your commitment for this next year to the church, to this community that you are a part of, to God, to a life of discipleship with Jesus. So if I were preaching, I'd maybe go down that road as well, of that's in part what's being asked here.
Rolf's very excited about Deuteronomy 30. I can tell.
If you were going to hang your entire theology on one verse, it might be choose life. So this is at the end of Deuteronomy. I kind of wonder if they've chosen it to kind of counterbalance the stuff in the gospel reading. But it's really wonderful. And this is actually might be an easier pill to swallow for people on Rally Day, which is the call to choose life. So in the end, in verse 15, you get two pairs of opposites. On the one hand, life and prosperity. The word prosperity is a bad choice. It literally just says goodness, or choose the good. So prosperity, I guess, but choose life and that which is good, or death and that which is evil or not good. Kind of reminded of Caddyshack. Do you want to be good, Danny? If you remember the scene. If you don't, just roll with me. And then it goes ahead to verse 19. Choose life. And what does choosing life look like? Verse 20. Love God, obey God, and to hold fast to God, for that means life to you and length of days. So the idea here is that choosing God and to follow God's ways and to be committed to God is to choose life itself, because God is the force that creates life and sustains life and is creation affirming.
Well, and that's in part what Jesus is asking, right? It's choosing life with God and with Him. And so you put that in conversation with Luke. It's a precipitous moment. Well, at least in Deuteronomy it is, as they're about to cross into the promised land. There's some choices one has to make.
There are, and it's really effective rhetoric. We'll see this again in Psalm 1. All right, there's two ways. Choose the right way, choose the good way. Real life's a little more muddled than that from time to time. But this isn't moral philosophy, right? This is exhortation. Mm-hmm. And so, but to think about, there's a way in which what's going on here in Deuteronomy 30 is a kind of characterization of the entire law, and how that's all being now lived out in terms of preparing the people to begin a nation and those types of things. But it's, you've got options out there. And I've given you one that I think is, that I know God says is good for you and good for your neighbor, and not onerous, not a way of like me exercising power or control over your decisions. And I think you can't preach that enough, right? So many people still operate out of a kind of functional theology of God as this rule giver who likes to put us in a subservient role just so we remember our littleness, but there's a vision of human flourishing here that's worth talking about, maybe especially on a day called Rally Day. Well, flourishing day, that's what I'm going to call it.
Flourishing day. Well, the commentary has a lovely line, the Deuteronomy commentary, that the church's witness in this season is therefore not primarily about achieving moral perfection or following rules. It is about inhabiting a life that is shaped by God's presence. Choosing a life that is shaped by God's presence. And that's the promise. As you noted, Rolf, is that loving the Lord your God, obeying God, but holding fast to Him. I was going to ask you, what is that verb there?
It's probably the verb cling. What verse is that in?
Verse 20, holding fast to God, for that means life to you and length of days, so that you may live in the land.
It actually is, it's obeying His voice is actually what it says in Hebrew. So probably obeying His voice would be a better translation.
And holding fast.
Every once in a while, I'm baffled by certain choices. Actually, that's not true. Hold on. Obeying Him. No, it is devout. Sorry. I was reading this clause behind it in Hebrew, which is obeying Him. It is cling to.
Cling.
Yeah. Cleave to.
Yeah. I think that too is so important here, that what God is inviting God's people into, or reminding them of that relationship, especially, in this text, as going into the land that God has promised them. But that cleaving to God, clinging to God, is that ultimate source of life.
Yeah, and if you go back, so this is the coda to the entire book of the law in Deuteronomy, the second book of the law. This is what Bernie Levinson, a friend of mine who's a Jewish scholar, says about, he actually doesn't write, he writes this about the law in Exodus, but it really fits Deuteronomy, which is his main thing. So he says, the point of the text is history is contingent upon moral action. There's no theology without history, no duties to God without duties to the neighbor, no self except one that is constructed in relationship to God and neighbor. And I think that's what you're saying, is that there is no true self that is also not contingent upon relationship with God and neighbor. And that's what choose life here means. We had better move on. We've only talked about 2 texts.
Well, should we bring in Psalm 1 before we go to the...
I think so.
It's that quite frequently already.
Yeah, well, Psalm 1 is the invitation to the Psalter, appended at the beginning to say, hey, here's what this book is. This is a book of meditation on the Torah of the Lord. And there's 2 roads. You can go down this road. It's the road less traveled kind of thing, or that road. And the road less traveled is the one that delights in the law of the Lord. And then, just because the psalmist likes to mix metaphors, you get the image of a tree which thrives in difficult circumstances. It gives fruit in every season. Its leaves don't wither, even in spite of the dryness or the other crises to its health. It's planted next to a stream of water, so it has something through which to draw life. And so that's the image of the person who is invested deeply in sinking their own roots into the Torah of God. And then the countervailing image is of chaff that the wind drives away. I think this is maybe a more inviting rally day text, which is, hey, this is what we're doing here. We're coming back. This is what Sunday school is about, a program year. Look at all the ways we have for you to be like the tree that's planted by streams of water.
Good sermon.
And then say, and the way of the wicked will perish.
The way, it doesn't say the wicked will, it says the way of the wicked. That is the road. So, I mean, because we're so used to metaphor, turning way into a metaphor, but it's really the pathway, the road, which is interesting. The Lord watches over, literally in Hebrew, knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. This is about faith in Christ, faith in the triune God, in this case, faith in Yahweh as a way of life.
Lots of connecting themes there so far.
All right, Jeremiah 18. This is what?
It's our third in Jeremiah. Lots of Jeremiah.
I love this text. I had an advisee, Josh, who was a potter. And so I preached one time in chapel, and he brought in a pottery wheel and was fashioning it into a pot and unfashioning it as he and I had planned the sermon together. Commentary, and I know the commentary is trying to make this point, but I'm not sure. I just want to make sure it's when it talks about a modern praise song, "Change My Heart." You are the potter, I am the clay. That individualizes. The clay here is not the individual in the text. The clay here is the nation. Very different. So we might think about it more as the church or the community of faith rather than an individual believer. I think that's really important.
Which is another, again, a great entryway if we think about Rally Sunday or Coming Together Sunday, that this is God's activity for the community, that this is what God is about, forming a community in that active and very attentive way into something that's unique and can't be at all replicated. That could be something too that pastor might or preacher might want to, this is a unique community that God is forming with God's very own hands. And so I think you could do a lot with that metaphor too.
The image of God as the potter, and as the text says, God will change. Again, to quote Bernie Levinson from what I read, history is contingent upon moral action, that God will change based on what we do in terms of how God acts towards us. That's the point of the text. Now, you might not believe that necessarily, but that's certainly what Jeremiah believes, which is that the nation as a whole, God might intend to bring judgment against it, but if it repents, then God will change that intention and bring deliverance upon the nation. And so the image of God is one who actually change. He answers prayer. He responds to our activity instead of the fact that then God's eternal self does not change. I mean, it is sometimes that distinction is hard for people.
If you're in the midst of a Jeremiah series, you really want to spend some time with this text, in part because coming up in the next few weeks, you've got some really difficult texts where it can be difficult to discern God's care or concern for the nation because it's going to get rough. And so hopefully you've been doing this already the previous 2 weeks with Jeremiah, but trying to help people get a sense for not just the reality of destruction coming, but what God's long-term plan might be in the midst of all of that in terms of reworking or reshaping something to come out of the ashes, to mix metaphors.
Yes, but that's right.
Yeah, out of the clay, out of the lumps. All right, or you can do a series on Philemon.
Which would be a short series.
Yeah, just got to do it one day. Philemon's a remarkable little book.
Why do you think
I'll tell
so?
you that. Well, it's a book that's important for so many things, so many reasons. It's a great way to help people get a sense for what Paul is trying to do in his ministry. In other words, he is trying to help people learn how to live Christianly in a Christian manner where there are very few precedents or roadmaps. And Paul has little to draw on in terms of like precedent, right? Or this is the way we've always done it. And so here, you've got a situation in which we can't fully reconstruct. The commentary by AKM Adam on the website helps with that. We don't know who these people are. But Paul is trying his rhetorical best, or maybe most confusing for us, to help Philemon think about family obligations. Like, how does the gospel create these familial obligations one to another that might very well fly in the face of deeply seated cultural norms that nobody thought could change? That could be enslavement, for one thing. He could be saying, I know Onesimus is your property. He's your slave. Nevertheless, you're going to treat him like a brother, which is revolutionary in a million ways. The problem is nobody knows quite how to do that because there are a host of reasons why that couldn't practically be done, why that might be even more dangerous to Onesimus in the long run if he was just pushed out the door and set free. Wouldn't quite look like liberation. It all depends on setting and aspects of the context. So anyway, the point is, here you've got a text where Paul is really trying to work out something brand new and saying something's got to be different about how we live as Christians in the midst of this. That's one reason. The second reason, I'll be a lot quicker with this, is it's a text that has become interwoven with more modern debates about enslavement. And so the church's own history can be seen in this text, in the United States in particular, but other parts of the Western world through colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade, where the church gave endorsement to a so-called gentler, kinder, merciful form of slavery where Christians could and should own slaves because we could make lives better for people. I mean, lies like that, right? And so
we could do it in a Christianly way.
Exactly. And so you've got a text here that was cited by pro-Christian, pro-slavery Christians in the United States in the 19th century and abolitionist Christians in the 19th century. And they both had plenty of arguments they could make from this book, which is sometimes how ethical interpretation of Scripture works.
I think a lot of preachers are not going to preach on this text for obvious reasons. I do think it's worth sitting down and just reading the book of Philemon straight through and asking even if you're not going to preach on it or do anything with it, as a test case, what do I think I know about a text? And then read it and try to suspend what you think you know. And I think then Akma's commentary is a helpful sort of then conversation partner there because he does kind of lay out various options. Because some of this is really moving in terms of the familial language when he says, I'm sending back my own heart to you. And even though he's a slave, you are to treat him as a brother. I mean, that's really powerful language.
And I think it reminds us that the impact of Jesus for Paul, but for what comes out of that revelation of Jesus happens on this very personal one-on-one level. We're used to seeing Paul writing to congregations, churches that he's founded or churches that he's going to visit. which has a larger audience. And here, that just that personal letter that's how deep down, that's the influence and influence is actually not the right word, of this revelation of Jesus Christ to Paul, that even in something that nobody maybe would even pay attention to, in this case, I mean, he is, but that to have it's at this, even at this level, where structures and expectations get completely reoriented and expectations revisited and upended because of the meaning of the death and resurrection of Jesus.
And that makes an interesting text to read the same week we're doing Luke 14, which talks about hating your own family. Here's a reasoning out what does Christian familial relationship look like? And it's costly in and of itself to care for one another.
Sermon Brainwave is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. Working Preacher has been a trusted source of inspiration, interpretation, and imagination for preachers worldwide since 2007. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/brainwave, and be sure to rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.